This is Stanford Engineering's The Future of Everything, and I'm your host, Russ Altman. The world seems to be more polarized today than ever. People use the internet to create echo chambers where they only see and hear opinions that they already agree with. And they're never exposed to ideas, opinions, thoughts that might actually move their opinion. This has led to polarization. We see this especially in Washington, D.C., where politicians and political parties seem rarely able to communicate or even work together on any issues because of radically different views of the problems and what their solutions should be. And yet democracy is based not just on voting, but on debate, discussion, and finding some common ground. Have we totally lost our ability to have discussions and change our minds after hearing somebody else make an argument? Well, Professor Jim Fishkin at Stanford University is in the departments of communications and political science. He's an expert on the topic of deliberative democracy. How to structure tough conversations between people who come in with radically different views. He has created protocols for these conversations that have been used all over the world by governments and institutions that had to make tough decisions. They make decisions about policies, about resource allocation, and about politics. Jim has written a book entitled Democracy When the People Are Thinking, published by Oxford University Press. So Jim, I want to start out, you have proposed this idea of deliberative democracy and that it can be very important and valuable in addressing all the divides that separate people, small divides, big divides. So I guess to start out with, what is your conception of deliberative democracy?
Well, the point of democracy is to make some connection between what we often refer to as the will of the people and then what's actually done. But everybody's trying to manipulate the public will and provide half-truths, disinformation, carefully market-tested sound bites, sometimes just made-up stuff spread on social media. So the first challenge is, can we assess what the people really would think about an issue if they thought about it? And could weigh the competing arguments. So that's what deliberative democracy is about, and we've developed a practical method for implementing it, both with representative samples, stratified random samples of the public, and then also we have a technology for scaling the deliberation. So the deliberative polling, as I call it, or the work on deliberative democracy, has two aims. It's to restore the deliberative process, the thinking process, with good information to public will formation, to the very formation of the will of the people. And secondly, we've discovered as a byproduct, to our surprise, that this has dramatic effects on extreme partisan polarization, indeed all of our divisions, basically because people are getting their information in their filter bubbles. They're hearing one side of the argument or their chosen media source, and they have no idea what people on the other side are thinking. And so when people deliberate together in randomly selected groups, let's say of 500, but then in small groups of 10, they open up and listen to each other over a period of time, and they have a better chance to understand the competing arguments. Now, there's a lot that going into the design to make sure that it doesn't blow up.
Exactly. I wanted to ask you, how do you set these up so that you can achieve balance and deliberation and not just a big food fight?
Yes. Well, food fights are tasty to some people, but they're not the aim for us.
Right.
What we've discovered is that moderated small group discussion with a prepared agenda of vetted, balanced materials where you get the best arguments on either side on a policy proposal, and people are incentivized to listen to each other and take their turns and then have a civil discussion. Over a period of time, usually a weekend, people arrive at doing that. I mean, a few people, it blows up for a few people, but for most people, there are some astonishing changes of opinion that result. And there are also some lasting effects as people encounter others who are very different from themselves, who have different perspectives, and they see the merit in what other people are trying to do.
Now, you have even in your introduction comments, you mentioned groups of 10 and groups of 500, and it seems to me that might be a very different dynamic. So, does it really scale that well when it's are these in person?
Well, first of all, the groups of 10 are the groups of 500 are decomposed into groups of 10 or 12.
Ah.
So they alternate small group and plenary sessions. The small groups are in manageable sizes. We've 10 or 12 people. And then we gather them together where the key questions that people have worked on that they need answers to on the issue are then posed to panels of competing experts who representing the different points of view in plenary sessions where they're all together.
Gotcha.
And we do this both face-to-face and online. And lately, we've been doing it online with our new technology developed here at Stanford with Ashish Goel and his in management science and engineering and his crowdsourced democracy team. And we've co-created an automated moderator system where these are done in video-based small group discussions where we don't even need a moderator. We have we facilitate the groups moderating themselves, and
Yes.
it works. And it's that technology of the automated moderator that we're now proposing to use to scale to much larger numbers of participants. But it's also made applying deliberative polls much cheaper. It's cut the cost tremendously, and we are now doing them at a much faster pace around the world. The Chilean project we did then went to Peru. We just did a national Peruvian one, and we did Hong Kong, and we did Tokyo, and it works in any language. And we're going to we're about to do it in Norway.
Okay, so wait, but this sounds great. So before we go to the automation, I want to make sure that we have a really clear idea. So it sounds like you have to do a lot of homework to find the balanced viewpoints that need to be represented. But at the very core, how do you even decide that a question needs to be considered? So you're mentioning these countries. So maybe give me a couple of examples of tough questions where this kind of process was the right answer.
Oh my goodness, we have 115 cases in 34 countries, and many of them are very notable both for the public will formation and for the depolarization.
Right.
And we've done these both, as I say, both face-to-face and online. The deliberative polling has a long history now because we've been doing it with various collaborators since 1994. So it brought wind power to Texas, where Texas at the beginning was last in the amount of wind power among the 50 states. By the time we finished, it was first. And we did it with the Public Utility Commission and with all the utilities in Texas where they had to consult the public. And if they just had public meetings, they'd get lobbyists. If they did polls, the public didn't have the information to assess the trade-offs. If they did focus groups, they're too small to be representative. So they did 8 deliberative polls with us, and we also broadcast on each of the local public television stations in the areas. But the bottom line was the public, this was a question that was ripe for decision, and so we considered coal and natural gas and wind power and conservation, that is demand-side management, and what the public went for was they were willing to pay a bit more on their monthly bills if they could subsidize wind power. Also subsidized demand-side management, and that was actually implemented. So in that case, the agenda came from decision makers who faced a requirement that the public somehow be consulted, and instead of just getting noise, or instead of just getting dominated by the lobbyists, everybody agreed, or the intense groups, everybody agreed it would be a good idea to consult the public by using social science to get a good sample, and then began by allowing an agenda for deliberation where we get an advisory group that represented all the options, and they had to vet materials for discussion. And so it's basically that pattern that has replicated itself in all kinds of contexts. In Australia and in Denmark, before referendums, where there's a national referendum, we don't choose the topic, but the topic is already on the agenda. But this allows the media and now the government to create an informed and representative viewpoint.
Yeah.
And indeed, those things end up getting broadcast by television. So we did one years ago in Denmark on whether they should join the Eurozone. And then ever since, there have been 6 additional deliberations commissioned by the parliament on issues that they wanted to hear from the public about, usually when there was going to be a referendum. And they wanted to convene a national sample. So my colleague, Kasper Møller Hansen from University of Copenhagen, has led those after we did the first one with him. But they're on the deliberative polling model. So those are cases where there's an issue on the agenda, so we didn't select the issue, but we convened the process.
So listen, this sounds great, and few points emerged very important. First of all, you don't go into these with an answer in mind. Like, this is not a question of convincing people of a certain position. You really are going in saying what's the sense of the public. The second thing is, it sounds like this is open to everyone. This is not just a panel of experts, but that you include the public, and as part of it, you inform them, and then and then allow them to deliberate. So one of my questions before we get to the automated online version is, I'm sure that part of the success of this when it's in person is people see each other as people, and they kind of are able to put themselves in the shoes of others. And I was wondering, how strong is that element of it in terms of just seeing that the other person is a reasonable person who's just trying to understand the world and get by, and is that an important element of it, the in-person aspect?
The opportunity to see the people you're talking to and learn to listen to them is an important aspect, but during the COVID period, we've been doing these online. We did one in Britain on Brexit issues or post-Brexit issues using Zoom. But now that we have the national sample, but now that we have the automated moderator, we applied that in Chile to what was Chile was in turmoil, and the issues were the pension system and the healthcare system. So we did something called the Chile 400. It was actually 500 because so many more people showed up. It's sponsored by the Chilean Senate, and but widely covered by CNN and all the press. And it was an entire weekend of deliberation. And to our amazement, at the end of the deliberation online on our platform, where everybody in each small group could see each other the whole time, they bonded so strongly that they were crying at the end that they had to stop and planning reunions. So I think the bonding of the small groups works online well, just as it would face to face, and it saves a ton of money.
So now let's move to this. I know you've talked about a chatbot or an automated moderator. That seems to me, just not being an expert at this, it seems so dangerous because you have this process that it works in person, and I presume that these people who facilitate are very good at making sure that people don't speak over each other, that respectfulness is maintained. But it sounds like you've been convinced that automated methods can moderate. So tell me about how that works, and it must have been very stressful to try it the first time.
Yes, and we're iterating, and every time it improves. But the Chilean project was used with our automated moderator, and we even tried it out with the Stanford faculty because, as you know, Stanford is building this new school for sustainability,
Yes.
and there are all kinds of not in my backyard issues about this. And the administration threw all of those on our plate, and we gathered an advisory group, and we tried it out with a sample of Stanford faculty, who I think are the toughest critics in the world, as you know.
Yes.
And they loved it.
They loved
it. In fact, we were inundated with requests that could this be adopted somehow, so they could use it at their faculty meetings, because they'd love to limit their colleagues to 45 seconds at a time. Now the way it works is the automated moderator controls the queue for discussion among the 10 or 12 people. And people sign up on the queue if they want to speak. Each speech is limited to 45 seconds. We, of course, can adjust that, but that seems to work well.
That's fantastic.
And then it nudges people who have not spoken, or who have not participated very much. It nudges them privately. We haven't heard from you yet on this. Would you like to contribute? And it has the agenda on the right side. You see the pictures of everybody. If somebody's speaking, their picture gets bigger. You see on the right side, you see the agenda with specimen pro and con arguments from the briefing document. It plays a video summary of the briefing before the session. Yep. People work through the agenda, and it asks, have we discussed, it asks the group as key points, have we discussed this proposal enough? Are you ready to move on to the next? And they quickly vote behind the scenes. And then the most magical part is it creates it facilitates the group coming to its key questions, because the product of the small group discussion, where they work together regardless of their viewpoint, is to identify a couple of the most important questions for them to get answers to in the plenary sessions, and those from competing experts. And those questions they revise. They see somebody types out a question. The revisions are suggested. They vote on the different versions, ranked choice voting, and eventually they come to two top proposals. And all of this is done. The associate director of my Center for Deliberative Democracy, Dr. Alice Hsu, has a very pleasing voice, and it has her voice. Her voice is the voice of the automated moderator. I wanted to call it Alice, but she doesn't want it to be called Alice. But it's Alice's voice. Of course, in the Japanese case, it's not. There's a Japanese Alice, but when the participants rate the moderation from the automated moderator, it rates as high or higher than the best of our human moderators, and we train the human moderators at great length never to give any hint of their own position. Right. Of course, the automated moderator has no position. Never to facilitate a roughly equal discussion, and these discussions are equal, and it gives us the actual an immediate transcript of all discussions, and we can do automated text analysis to see what's really moving the opinion, and how the talking time is distributed, and it's always very equal. And so the idea is to get people, is to prevent anybody from dominating the discussion, and we look at whether the discussions are dominated by whether they systematically move in the direction of the more educated, the more advantaged, the males, we got nothing like that. People are moving by the forceless force of the better argument, to use Habermas's phrase.
This is The Future of Everything with Russ Altman. More with Jim Fishkin next on SiriusXM Business Radio Channel 132. Welcome back to The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman, and I'm speaking with Professor Jim Fishkin of Stanford University. In the last segment, Jim described the deliberative democracy process for structuring conversations to help reach consensus even when people come in with wildly different views. In this segment, Jim will tell us that even the deep divisions within the U.S. politics, both the Congress and people out in the field, can be bridged with these approaches. In addition, he's optimistic that the introduction of new technologies will enable him to scale this and bring it to larger populations for more and different conversations.
Well, characterizing DC right now would take us more time than we have, except words like deadlock, extreme division, extreme partisan polarization. Indeed, Lynn Vavreck, the political scientist, came through and said they're not just polarized; the public is calcified, right, which implies intractable divisions. And so I pointed out that when we did America in One Room, just before the last presidential election, we picked the 5 biggest issue areas facing the country. We looked at the polling about what topics the people wanted to discuss, and we discussed them in depth, and we found that many of them contained highly polarized, what we regarded as extreme polarized positions, where Republicans were on one side, Democrats were on the other. A big percentage of the Republicans and Democrats took the most extreme positions on opposite sides, and they seemed to be immovable. Right. Then we put them together in this deliberative process. They moved. I mean, on immigration, for example, which you remember was very hot and is about to get hot again, yes. 80% of the Republicans wanted to send the undocumented immigrants back to their so-called home countries. After deliberation, only 40%. That's a drop of 40 points. Similarly, changes on DACA, on support for DACA went way up. Among the Republicans now I'm talking about, or support for refugees, all these things that you would never believe in terms of big changes, 30 points up to 40 points. On some other issues, the Democrats moved 40 points, particularly the most redistributive and progressive proposals. When they heard the other side, they moved on universal basic income, on Cory Booker's proposal at the time to provide a baby bond for each child born, went from that also dropped 40 points, from 60% to 20% or something like that. And the Medicare for All dropped because people started to think through the implications for those who had health insurance, didn't want to replace it with Medicare for All. Right. And so there were big changes all around on both sides. And so the New York Times was so surprised by that they put the pictures of all 526 participants in the newspaper, both online and then in print. And then they featured the big changes. And then they asked us at the election to find out if it had any lasting effects. And so we went back at the election with the New York Times to our treatment group, the 526 yep. selected by NORC at the University of Chicago, which really is the best survey organization, certainly the most systematic and meticulous and rigorous survey organization in the United States. And they got a treatment group and a control group. And we went back to our control group. The election, they got it exactly right, about a 3-point difference in the national difference between Biden and Trump. But in the treatment group, there was a massive shift to support Biden, a massive shift. And so the explanation, which we have a paper under submission about, is that the people who deliberated became much more engaged citizens. They became much more aware of the campaign. They kept getting more knowledgeable about the campaign. They had a greater sense of efficacy, that they had views worth listening to. And they voted in much higher numbers. In the control group, many of those people in the sort of broad middle didn't even vote. Even in that election. And that was the difference. And those are the people who turned out for for Biden rather than Trump. And we know that because not only did we ask them just before the election, we also asked them after the election, how did they vote? And it was exactly the same. So we created more engaged and informed citizens, and that was a year later.
Right. That's important, and I guess one of your challenges is to not get the reputation that this is always going to move people in a direction, in a political direction that others might say, well, let's squash this because whenever we do this, we start losing elections. So I'm sure you're in a difficult position in terms of maintaining that bipartisanship.
Yes. Well, notice on the weekend, on a lot of issues, the Democrats moved.
Right.
I mean,
that's the key thing.
The Democrats moved, particularly in the economic issues. They moved, and on some of the healthcare issues, they moved quite a bit. So it seems to me, but that was a particular. In some other election, they might the participants might have gone a different way. But in that particular election, given that choice of candidates, that's the way they moved.
So listen, we have about a minute and a half, and I know that you want to talk about the possibility of scaling this. What you just described is extremely interesting because we all want to get along better, and we all want to be a little bit more purposeful. So tell me about the concept of how to scale this in the future to larger groups.
Well, the ultimate aspiration, Bruce Ackerman at Yale and I wrote a book called Deliberation Day many years ago, 2004, where we thought we should eventually have a national holiday where everyone deliberates on a day before the presidential election.
Wow.
Well, that would be the ultimate idea. But in the meantime, we had a big price tag for that. But in the meantime, we have the automated moderator, and it's very cheap to do this, and we can get the people to do it. And when people deliberate on the automated moderator, they love it. They're always asking us about friends. Can they suggest it to others? So we want to see if we can spread it virally and scale. And we're starting with civic groups. We're starting with universities around the country, and we're going to build up to getting all kinds of parts of the mass public. When we scale it, we're not talking about a stratified random sample. We're talking about opening it up to more people as an educational process.
Yes.
And we're going to try to get it into the schools. And we think that if the ultimate goal is to create not just a deliberative poll, but a more deliberative society.
Yes.
Where this becomes part of our democratic habit that we learn to listen to others, but under conditions where there's a design so that it just doesn't blow up with people yelling at each other, but rather a kind of collective search for the best answers for our communities.
Thanks to Jim Fishkin. That was the future of deliberative democracy. You have been listening to The Future of Everything with Russ Altman on SiriusXM Business Radio, Channel 132.